Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Horse Advocate Podcast. This is Doc T. I'm so grateful that you're here. This is the Thanksgiving week, post-Thanksgiving week. It is a celebration that we have here in America that is held every November, the fourth Thursday in November, where we all just celebrate family, friends, gratefulness, things that we're thankful for. It's such a wonderful, wonderful time of the year. It's my favorite. And we celebrated it not on the Thursday, but the following Sunday, which is just a few days ago, because my son decided to come back from the other side of the planet where he lives to visit mom and dad. And he came in and we had our feast on Sunday. So I have a little bit of brain fog doing this, which happens when you eat a lot of things that you shouldn't eat, like pumpkin pie, etc. But through the brain fog, this is a little bit of too much information, but this is my third attempt at recording this. It's so funny. The first one I didn't like, so I just put an end to it. The second one I liked and it was good, but somehow the record button didn't work. So it went into the vapor someplace. Oh, it cracked me up. I'm glad that you guys love me. I assume that you do. That's why you're here. I know that a couple of you have sent me messages saying that you live in far parts of the world and you listen to this podcast and look forward to it because I give you such great information that you can use and that have helped you in your part of the world with your horses. And I got to tell you, it's humbling. I know that the weight and the responsibility of giving you good, high quality information is important. And the information I give you, you can't find anywhere else because I'm not beholden to anybody. There are people out there I'm sure would like to silence me, but this is all my deal. And I'm so grateful for that and the opportunity and the audience that I've got with you guys listening. So thank you. Thank you for all your comments. You lift my spirits. There are days where I go out and say, well, it's another day. I got to go do this. And then I run into a horse that says, thank you. Or I get a note from one of you guys that says, thank you. And it really makes it worthwhile. So I'm not going to bore you with anything more than that. So this is my third time through it. So this is the Journal of American Veterinary Medical Association. It is December 23rd, December of 2023 issue. And it's volume, what is that? 261, number S2, which is a supplemental issue, which means that it is devoted, it's a supplement to our regular journal that we get. This is called Dentistry in Your Practice, Making Gold Standard Recommendations. And I find that fascinating. First of all, if you're not watching this on YouTube, which probably 99.9% of you are not, because we haven't gotten the YouTube page up and running, but the cover of it is a cat, and they're showing the lesions that are occurring inside the cat's mouth with microbacteria that are causing all sorts of problems and cell proliferation. And I find it fascinating because this is all, it's a lot of artificial intelligence used to do this. It's not somebody with a paintbrush, but they use a lot of interesting things, computer graphics to make that work. And it's just a fascinating medical diagram. I'd love to hire her to do some medical diagrams for me, but none of you step forward with multi-$100 million to make this a top-notch deal. You're just stuck with me once a week in my little, very little recording studio, reading things to you to try and bring you some information that makes sense. So before I get into this, I'm going to adjust my seat. Before I get into this, I want to make a quick detour down the role of scientific journals. I've done this before. I've done podcasts on this. I've got a gal who's lined up. At some point, I've got to get my stuff together to invite her to come speak and tell us from a researcher's point of view what research really is and how we can read through it and get different ideas. But this journal, this whole magazine, about 1/3 of it is devoted to equine horses, which is just phenomenal. And I want to pick there's two studies But the second one is part A and part B. At least that's how I look at it. That kind of shows you how research is done with agendas and ideas that people are trying to understand how things work. And we need data. And these are people's attempts to get data and then interpret it so we can use it. And they call it clinical significance. And I will do a little bit of arguing back and forth to tell you exactly what that means. The first one is a very interesting study that I think all of you need to pay attention to for two reasons. One, it's going to help you understand where cavities come from. And most of us here in our human world have cavities that we've had filled and had our dreaded day at the dentist as they numb you and drill you and pack them in with all sorts of amalgamates and whatever, trying to stop decay. And this tells you the pathophysiology, which means the nuts and bolts of how it happens and why it's happening inside your horse. And then the second thing is it's going to go over something fascinating for me, something I haven't seen in a long, long time. But it's not going to go in and tell you how to patch up holes in the horse's teeth, but it's actually going to say, hey, here's an idea. Let's prevent it. And I'm like, this is something I got to get out to all of you. So the title of this is called Recent Advances in the Treatment and Prevention of Equine Peripheral Caries. Now, what a peripheral carie is a cavity. It's just the fancier word for it. Cavities in horses can occur in two places. One is on the occlusal surface. They're called infundibular caries, where the decay goes straight down. It can split the tooth into fractures. We get fractured pieces all the time. Of course, fractured teeth did not occur in the textbooks in the 1980s when I went through Cornell. Somehow Cornell was left out of all the ideas that this is, no, I'm just making a joke. It wasn't there, folks. It just didn't happen. Maybe it occurred maybe once in a while, a case report, but it wasn't like we see one or two of these a week. And that's what's happening now. They're everywhere. And I think it's because of nutritional changes. But that's what a carie is. And peripheral caries is the decay of a certain material of the tooth, in this case, of the cementum, which covers the outer layer of the tooth right next to the gum line. And I'm going to explain to you why it's happening, how it's happening, and what we can do about it. That's what this whole thing is all about. That's why I'm so thrilled to report this recent advances in the treatment and prevention of equine peripheral caries by Kristen Jackson, BVMS, PhD, and Aaron Kelty, BSc, MBiostat, PhD, and they're all down in our buddies down there in Australia. And Australia is big on equine dentistry. They along with United Kingdom, seem to be leading the pack for equine dentistry and what's going on there. And I'm the little old guy here who still hand floats and doesn't use fancy equipment. And I'm still, I think, doing a lot to help you guys understand what's going on. Okay. So introduction, equine peripheral caries, further from now on called PC, peripheral caries, is a form of dental decay that primarily affects the outer layers, the cementum, of equine cheek teeth. Affected horses are prone to dental fracture, increased dental wear, soft tissue lacerations, and periodontal disease. Well, hold on. Here we are in the second sentence, and I'm like, oh, okay. So it's leading to soft tissue lacerations. I guess what they're saying is because the cementum's decayed, there's more exposure to the dental points, and because there's more dental points, those are leading to lacerations. They don't say that. I'm left to guessing. How does this dental caries lead to soft tissue lacerations, or increased dental wear, or periodontal disease? They just put out that statement. So I hate it when somebody just throws out a statement, and I know it's in the introduction, and they're going to tell me further in the report exactly how, but unfortunately, maybe my reading this twice, I've missed it. But anyway, and then it says, causing significant morbidity and pain in many affected horses. So these peripheral caries are causing the dental pain. I'm confused because I haven't seen that. But this is what gets me. When somebody comes, and no offense to Kristen and Aaron, that's I'm not trying to say to you guys that there's anything wrong here. It's just that it's not reality. I mean, I'm not seeing this. And I think it's wrong that you come out with these bold statements in the introduction. But in science, you have to come out with bold statements. You have to say something. It's like drawing a line, planting a flag. This is your belief. This is your statement. And you need to do a scientific study that proves this or doesn't prove this. But in the introduction, what they're trying to do is say, man, if you don't take care of dental caries, you're going to have all this morbidity and pain, and it's just going to be horrible for your horse. That's what they're trying to do. And I'm sitting here saying, what? There's a lot bigger things out there. And I'll get to the very end when I sum this up, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Recent work has shown that the condition affects the clinical crown and that the reserve crown remains largely unaffected. So what they're saying is the tooth that's exposed to the oral cavity, which is called the clinical crown, it's the part of the tooth that you can see, is affected, whereas the tooth that you can't see that's under the gum, that still hasn't erupted yet, that's not affected. Okay, that's a good statement. Remember, teeth continually erupt throughout life. They do not grow. And you see a section of tooth that's above there, and as it wears down, it ratchets it up more from the reserve under the bone and makes that exposed, which is kind of a neat system. The reason they do that is because horses are obligate herbivores, what you as a human would call a vegetarian or vegan. I get them confused, but you only eat plants. You're not going to eat any animals, except maybe if there's a bug on the leaf, you might eat them. But basically, you're eating plants. And that's what horses do. They're obligate. They can't eat anything else. You don't ever see them sitting down fishing or raising cattle or hunting down rabbits. They just don't do it. They eat nothing but grass. And to do that, they have to eat a lot throughout the day to get enough intake to meet their protein needs. Now, I've gone over this before. If you don't understand that, you'll just have to come back and find another podcast where I talk about how important protein is. But protein is your primary goal, and the horse will eat until they're filled with their protein, and they continue to eat. To do that, they have to have a tooth that replaces itself because there's so much wear and tear. Where you and I or dogs don't need that. We can bring in our teeth, and they basically don't erupt any further, basically. All right. I think that's all I want to say about the introduction. And then they talk about the prevalence and sequela of equine peripheral caries. And they show some pictures, and they grade them 0, grade 1.1 and 1.2, which is like a fine division, then grade 2, then grade 3, and of course, grade 4 being the worst, where the peripheral cementum that's decayed has now come up over the tooth and has created a hole in the middle of the occlusal surface. I call that essential necrosis. At least that's what I've been calling it for years before the fancy words come in and find out that I'm not saying it right. But the peripheral caries grade 4 has invaded the occlusal surface and creates a hollow spot. So if you look at the outer layer of the tooth as a cementum, then the next layer right next to it is the enamel. And what's really interesting about the enamel is it sits a little bit higher. And that's the sharp point that digs into your horse's tongue and cheek. And that's what gets filed down because it doesn't go away unless you file it. And if the horse keeps licking his teeth, they will strop it, S-T-R-O-P, which basically means it's sharp as a razor. That's how you sharpen a knife. You get a leather strap, you put a little oil on it, you go back and forth on the leather strap. It's called stropping the razor, stropping the knife, and the tongue strops these teeth into a razor sharp edge. And that's what we take down. So that's cementum and enamel. And then there's other systems in there, dentin, et cetera. Dentin is connective tissue, which is the most abundant protein in the body. Oh, okay. So then they go into pathophysiology of dental caries. Now, this is the interesting part. And I know that all of you are on the edge of your seat because you want to know how caries form. So I'm not going to let you down. Caries is a chemical process. Now, when you look at teeth of your, humans and of horses, you think, wow, those things are hard. They're impenetrable. I can take a carbide blade and rasp them, and they're just almost invincible. Yeah, they're the hardest tissue. There's no doubt. But they're really not. And that's what's interesting. Now, a lot of veterinarians say, teeth are tissues, they're living tissues, and this is why you should have a veterinarian work on them, and non-veterinarians should not be in there because these are living tissues. So let me explain to you what that means. They are basically a mineral deposit, and these mineral deposits are held in organic molecules, and that means it has carbon in it. And what happens in the mouth, pardon me, there is no carbon. I take that back. But there's a mineral deposit called hydroxyapatite, and that's basically calcium and phosphorus, hydrogen and oxygen. Now, don't get freaked out. I'm not going down the chemical path too far, but you have to understand a little bit of chemistry. Calcium, potassium can come and go, and when it comes and goes, it loses or gains electrons and becomes an ion. It floats around, then it finds something it binds to, and it makes another molecule. So it's like, I don't know why I'm thinking of this. If you have a pan and you're cooking a flapjack in a pancake, and you flip it up in the air, or an omelet or whatever else you want, but you flip it up in the air and now it's floating through space. It isn't part of the pan anymore. It's just kind of flipped around. Well, that's the ion. Until it lands on the pan again, it becomes part of the pan. That's the molecule. I know it's a lousy thing, but sometimes I like to throw in some goofy things to keep it a little bit light here. So I don't want you to fall asleep on me. So this hydroxyapatite wants to give its minerals, basically calcium and phosphorus, and hydroxyl, which is an oxygen and hydrogen together, which is not water, which is H2O. This is just one H and one O. And it gives us these three things out and puts them into the fluid of the mouth. Now, that fluid is made by salivary ducts, the saliva that comes out. The salivary glands go through the ducts, and it pours the saliva into the mouth. And that's the fluid that's in there. And that fluid doesn't have a lot of minerals in it, so it sucks the calcium and phosphorus out of the tooth into the saliva, and it keeps bringing it out until it becomes saturated, and then it becomes oversaturated or supersaturated. And when that happens, then it throws the calcium phosphorus back into the teeth. So the calcium phosphorus is constantly going back and forth from tooth to fluid, back to tooth, back to fluid, and it reaches this equilibration. So it's basically the same on each side. Now, there's a lot of people out there who love the word balance. And if you've been around me for any amount of time, I hate the word balance because there's no symmetry anywhere in human. There's two eyes, but those two eyes look different. You have two ears, but one ear looks different. It's higher on the head. Who knows? But there's balance in the sense that there's two parts of this equation, and it tries to equilibrate the amount of calcium phosphorus in the tooth with what's in the fluid. Now, from this article, I can't tell you why they do that. They have no idea. They don't even, not only do they not mention it, they don't even say, we don't know why this works. They just say, this is the way it is. And I can understand that. There are a lot of processes that's the way it is. It's like when I wake up in the morning, I know that I have to have some coffee, or I have to have some food, or I have to get in the car and go to work, or I have to, there are certain things in life that just are. Well, we don't know why we do them, right? And this is one of them. So let's just go with the fact that calcium phosphorus is constantly in flux. It's a very dynamic process where it's coming and going into the fluid of the oral cavity and back into the teeth. Fine. Everything's fine, right? Well, then we come along. And this is the funny part, because we think we're helping horses thrive in a human world. In reality, you ain't. And we're trying to change that here at the Horses Advocate. So if you decide to change the pH of the mouth, now for those of you who don't know what pH is, it's a scale that measures hydrogen ions. Okay, it's a scale that says you're either an acid, you're neutral, or you're a base. Okay, and it ranges from 0, which is the most acidic, to 14, which is the most basic, with 7 being neutral. 7 is like the sweet spot. This is where we want to be. This is balance. All right. And as long as the pH stays above, I think it's 6.8. I'll find it here, 6.7. As long as it's above 6.7, this balance between calcium and phosphorus going from the tooth to the oral fluids is fine. But as soon as that pH starts to drop and become acidic, that balance is thrown off. And when balance is thrown off, just like you're on a high wire or trying to balance yourself, you're going to adjust by throwing weights on the other side to level the load, right? So if you have a big person on a seesaw, you're going to put 2 little people on the other end of the seesaw to balance the load. And what we do in the mouth is we decide to take more calcium and phosphorus out of the tooth and put it into the fluid of the oral cavity. And this is how we balance it with a low pH. And if it drops below 6.7, we're going to start taking more minerals out of the cementum than we're going to take out of any other part of the tooth. Now, 6.7 is only 0.3 below neutral of 7. And the mouth wants to be around neutral. So if you drop the pH of the mouth, you're going to start to demineralize the cementum, which is decay, which is dental caries. You get it? All right. If you further drop the pH down to 6.2, you're going to start removing the dentin, which is the other tissue of the teeth. And if you drop it down to 5.5, you're actually going to decay the enamel. So the question is, how do you get the pH down there? So if evolution is supposed to make everything right, not evolution, but the environment that we've lived in for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, the mouth of the oral cavity of the horse should remain above 6.7 and ideally around 7. How do we do that? Well, the horse is designed to eat forage, meaning pasture, meaning grasses and plants that are growing on the ground, and to drink water that's running through streams. That's basically groundwater. And that's all they eat, folks. They don't get anything else. They might find an apple tree in the fall. They might find, I don't know, some seeds, some oats someplace, for a week or 2 in the middle of summer. Okay, so they're going to find a stalk of corn, and they might engorge themselves because they have a whole field of corn, but after a week or 2, there's no more corn left. So they don't get this daily dose of sugar that comes from grains. And when you put sugar in the mouth of a horse or a human, you are actually promoting the bacteria that create an acid environment and you lower the pH, and that's how you get dental caries. It's that simple. That's why your dentist said, if you don't want to see me anymore, stop eating sugar. That's what my dentist said to me back in the 90s. And you know what I said to him? I said, unlikely. I like my sugar. Just like you say, everybody else says it. And we like our sugar because we think we're loving our horses by giving them bowlfuls of grain and sugar treats and carrots and all these other sugar bombs. And we're not realizing that we're altering the microbiome of the gut, which starts at your lips. So when you change the pH and it drops below 7 down to 6.7, you're going to wear away the enamel of the, the cementum of the tooth. And that's going to lead to exposure of enamel, and that could lead to greater, sharper points. I don't know. So in this really cool flow chart, just in case you're looking at this, there's a nice flow chart. I love flow charts that are simple and make sense. So they basically said, when you have carcinogenic oral flora, I don't know where they get oh, that's me reading. Sorry. When you get cariogenic oral flora, in other words, when you promote the growth of the microbiome, of the biofilm is the thin film of mucus and bacteria that is on all of our bodies, inside and out. We are a walking microorganism factory. And when you get microbes that are growing inside the mouth that are conducive to creating cavities, you're going to add fermentable dietary carbohydrates, i.e. sugars, and you're going to get the production of acid. And over time, it's going to reduce the pH of the biofilm to below critical levels. Again, 6.7 for cementum, 6.2 for dentin, and 5.5 for enamel. And this will, low pH drives calcium phosphorus from the tooth into the biofilm to reach equilibrium, which is another word for demineralization of the tooth. Now, in my mind, that makes sense. In my mind, that's simple. If in your mind you're lost, I'll try to just sum it up this way. If it's like a tennis ball at a tennis match, when the ball is being volleyed, it's just going back and forth from one player to the other over net. So the tennis ball represents calcium phosphorus ions in the tooth on one side, and it's being sucked across, not hit by bat, but sucked, racket, sucked across to the other side where it's going to go into the fluid. And then the fluid gets more, so it goes swinging back to the other side. So just as a volley back and forth, and that's happening. Now, if you move the net closer to one side, so it's not directly in the middle between two players, you're going to have to do a little bit more movement to keep the ball going back and forth. And maybe the person on the one side hits the ball, but it doesn't have enough to get over the net because the net is so far away. So it fails. So you have the deposit of mineral on that side. It doesn't get to the other side. So it's no longer in equilibrium. And to make it work, the other person starts hitting more balls and more minerals left not where it belongs. I know it's a kind of a crazy analogy. I just come up with these on the fly. But the point is, there's a balancing that's going on, and that change in the pH is going to change that. So more calcium is going to leave the tooth and go into the oral cavity. When that happens, the decay occurs and you have your dental carie. Now, I've been harping on sugars because sugar is the number one thing. Now, sugars, we all think of grain. Okay, great. We got that. But hay is also a big thing, and we keep forgetting. And they actually found that oat hay, they call it oaten hay, but I call it oat hay, which is pretty rare. Most people don't feed oat hay, but it's not really oat straw. It's cut at a different time, and it's fed to horses. And it has 3 times more, is more likely to have peripheral caries than if you're fed regular grass hay. So if you're feeding oat hay, You really shouldn't. It's just too high in sugar. I think I heard somebody say that their sugar content of their oat hay was like 24% or something really high. And that's what's causing problems. But here's something that I thought was amazing. The source of drinking water has also been found to be associated with peripheral caries. Horses on untreated groundwater were the least likely to be affected with PC, followed by fluorinated and treated town water supply. And then those on rainwater and dam water were significantly more likely to be affected. And what's really fascinating is when they looked at the average pH of rainwater is 5.9. And that's like below Denton and Cementum. So if you're making water available to your horse that's runoff from rain, collected or dammed up, and it's allowed to become stagnant, you're actually changing the pH of the rainwater, and that's going to add to the grain that you're feeding to lower the pH and promote dental caries. I thought that was amazing. They said the average pH of groundwater was 7.4, so that's well above neutral, so you're fine there. And town water was chlorinated and fluorinated is 7.9, so it's very basic. So you can avoid a lot of dental caries if that's happening. But they said, unfortunately, in measuring some groundwater in Western Australia, they found that the pH ranged from 4 to 8. So if you've taken away all the grain and you're making sure that your hay is soaked so there's no sugar in that, and your horse is still getting peripheral caries from, during the dental exam, be sure to test the pH of the water. I think that's interesting. They also said that collected water, or the wording they said was groundwater has 70 times more calcium than rainwater. And that makes sense because calcium's heavy. And to get rainwater, you have to evaporate and raise it up as steam. And then it condenses in a cloud and gets heavy and drops again. But there's no calcium in it. So the water that you put in the mouth is lacking calcium, which will cause more of a draw of calcium out of the teeth. So you want to make sure that you're not feeding ground rainwater. Make sure you pull it out of the ground. I've been saying for years, if you feed groundwater, you're feeding a lot of minerals. You're doing okay there. And get rid of all the sugar in the horse's life. So then they talk about this is really good. The peripheral carie recovery. What's interesting is if you can arrest the further development of dental caries in the horse and be patient over the next year or two, the tooth is going to erupt out fresh new cementum on the outside of the tooth, and your problem's solved. So if you change the environment, you're going to forever change the effect it has on the teeth if you're feeding bad stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool. And they said treatment and prevention. And they said the first thing you do is investigate risk factors. Like, duh. Sorry. Again, I apologize to the authors if I say stuff like that, duh. But I mean, they've got to put it into words in a format that veterinarians. Sorry, I'm just as much an idiot as them all. Trust me, I am not as smart as some of you think I am. I just read and ask tons of questions, and if I can't get answers, I get frustrated. But change the environment. If you've got fluoride out there, if it's a little bit of fluoride in the drinking water, it may be okay. But I know that Dr. Kruk, who was my professor in anatomy, thick German accent, was passionate about removing all fluoride in our drinking water. He said it's causing more problems than it's helping. Now, I've never had fluoridated water because all my water comes from the ground, always has, always will. But, and no, I don't have perfect teeth. But if you have too much fluoride, you can actually cause more demineralization of the teeth. He was saying this back in the 1980s. And they're saying that if you're downwind of an aluminum smelting factory, they didn't say that specifically here, but that's what Dr. Leonard Kruk said. And he had cattle that had horrible problems because the fluoride would fall out of the smokestacks onto the pastures, and the horses would be, the cattle would be in tough shape. So anyway, that's a side note. Most of us don't have to worry about fluoride in our water. They talk about active versus inactive caries, and it's almost identical in horses as it is in humans. They show about the different color and texture of these things and how you can see it. That's what your dentist is doing when they look in their mouth and they poke that little, scraper thing, pointed object in there. They're feeling for texture and stickiness to see if you're getting cemental caries, peripheral caries. So let me read the conclusion here. Recent literature has showed we need to change our perception of peripheral caries from horses that, quote, just have bad teeth, unquote, to thinking of it as a treatable, preventable environmental condition. We need to look closer at affected mouths to ascertain whether the caries are currently active or inactive. And if currently active, then the diet management should be assessed for risk factors and eliminated if possible. Okay. As I told you in the beginning, I would get to my conclusion here. My conclusion is in alignment, but much different. My conclusion is, yes, you have to be looking at the diet, but the conclusion that they did not say is that if you see peripheral caries in a horse, you know that some time has occurred that has caused changes in the mineralization of the teeth. Well, there are other problems going on in the horse that are occurring over the same amount of time. And that's the part that a lot of people just don't understand. In other words, if you're looking at the old adage, the canary in the coal mine, what's happening is if you're looking in the horse's mouth and you're seeing the peripheral caries, well, there are other things going on. The gut microbiome starts in your mouth and goes all the way to the anus. So you've got the stomach, the small intestine, the hindgut. That microbiome has also been adjusted. And you're starting to get, I don't know, maybe some ulcers, maybe some colics. Maybe you're feeding excess sugar that's causing the consumption of protein. And over time, you're starting to get a poor top line, hair coat, hooves, immune system. And you're sitting here saying, gosh, I've got peripheral caries. Well, on the list of problems that your horse has, from colic that's going to kill your horse, lameness that's going to cripple your horse, skin conditions that's going to drive them nuts in fly season, and cancers and other things, way down here on the bottom of the list is peripheral caries. I mean, they've got them. They're still eating, right? They're not really showing it a problem. Yeah, maybe when the horse is 25, 30, 35 years old, the teeth are falling out and you're going to have to make a mash, get some soaked alfalfa pellets, do some cooking in the kitchen, so to speak, to find some sort of food that the horse can eat. But you've got 15 other things going on: insulin resistance, Cushing's disease. You've got hair coat that won't shit out in the springtime. You got hooves that are falling apart, crushed heels. You've got a list of problems going on. And at the very bottom of the list, oh yeah, by the way, the cementum's kind of crappy, but at least the horse is erupting out new teeth. So, and yeah, he split a tooth, so he took the fractured tooth out. Yeah, but he's still eating. See what I'm saying? In other words, to these authors here, this is an important article to tell us that this damage is occurring. But what they're not telling you is if you see it in the horse, you've got bigger problems. Because if they're saying change the diet, well, aren't they saying that for insulin resistance or Cushing's disease or poor hair coat, poor hooves, poor muscling? I end my case on that one. Sorry, I can sometimes get off the deep end on some of these things, and I don't mean to tell you that, but you know, you got to look at everything that you read and ask bigger questions. And the more questions you can ask, the better off everybody is, the better off your horses are. And what's frustrating for me is you guys are soon going to say, well, Dr. Tucker believes that getting a horse off grain, getting on a non-inflammatory forage-only diet, and maybe adding soybean meal as a protein source is going to be the be-all and end-all and fix everything about the horse. No, but probably at least 90%. I can't deny that. Everything I tell you here at the podcast is get rid of inflammatory ingredients, which inflammation includes lowering the pH. It's throwing off the equilibration of mineralization, demineralization. That's wrong. So get that right. If you get that right, think of all the other processes down the line that are also going to fall into a line. I mean, to me, it's just pretty obvious. And then add some protein, because most horses are chronically protein deficient. You've heard that a billion times. And the horse is going to get back on his feet. Is it going to fix everything? No. There are going to be some things that you say, Doc, you know, I did everything you said, and the horse still didn't do right. Well, sorry, can't fix everything. There are some other things going on. And I'll do a little sidebar here. I promise it won't take more than 60 seconds. But there's something called Mendelian randomization. And it's a way of looking at science that is becoming more and more popular. When I read this title of this magazine, where it said, making gold standard recommendations for dentistry in your practice, this gold standard of scientific studies is called controlled randomized trials, RCTs. They're basically where you get a placebo group and you eliminate all factors except one, and you treat one group with a treatment, another group with a placebo, and you look for causality, not correlation. Correlation is not the same as causality. Causality is when you throw the light switch, the light comes on. You know that throwing the light switch throws lights on. That's causation. Until you throw the switch enough times and all of a sudden the light stops going on and off and you're throwing the switch and you're like, wait a minute, what happened to causation? Well, it had nothing to do with it. There's a guy in the other room looking at you, and every time he threw the switch to actually turn the light on. And he threw it off at the same time, on, off, and finally he got tired and stopped throwing the switch. And you're throwing the switch and you didn't get the same results. So there's a correlation between you throwing the switch, which had nothing to do with the light that you were looking at. That's correlation. The causation was the guy in the other room throwing the switch. And through Mendelian randomization, they're now looking at the genetic code that causes one particular thing. And they're now selecting for that genetic predisposition and realizing that all the other genetic code is the most randomized population compared to all the other animals or all the other people that you're putting in there, except for one thing. They all have this one genetic code that is identical, that makes them grow faster, taller, brown eyes, whatever they're looking for. They have this disease that they can encode in this one genetic snippet. And now they can do real studies on these people because they've identified that this genetic section is what's causing this disease. And now they can work on medications, et cetera, that can work on that specific genetic code. And that's the beginning of medicine 3.0. They're not doing that in horses. They're still trying to do randomized controlled studies and spoofing you into thinking that it's the most gold standard for us as horse owners to follow. And then they tell you that they looked at 150 horses and you're like, is that enough? You know, and what do you look for? Well, we look for this in thoroughbred mares. Well, what about, you know, a Shetland stallion or, you know, Arabian gelding? You know, and, you know, where's the, you know, it's just selection bias. But I digress, and I told you 60 seconds. That's probably more. So part 2, A and B, is two things. One is the widespread prevalence of equine odontoclastic tooth resorption and hypercementosis. If you haven't heard about that, I've podcasted about that a lot. It's called EOTRH. You can go to my website, type EOTRH into the search bar, and you're going to get a lot of information on what I think it is, and you're going to see lots of images of what it is. Anyway, to continue, the widespread prevalence of EOTRH detected in German Icelandic horse population. So they're not just Icelandic horses, but they're Icelandic horses that are living in Germany. And they're looking at the impact of the anamnestic response or anamnestic factors on etiology. What that means is the fancy word anamnestic just means age, sex, breed, color, management, feeding, things like that. It's the basics of what is going on with these horses and how they factor into etiology or the cause of EOTRH in horses. And the objective was to compare these factors, I can't even say it, all these other factors in EOTRH in affected and non-affected horses to detect risk factors for horses developing EOTRH. Now, what's really important is there's a sentence in here. It says the etiology and pathologic process of EOTRH are not known yet. They have no idea. All I know is all you have to do is lift the lips and look at the incisors with your eyeballs, and you can tell if a horse has EOTRH or even has the beginning stages of EOTRH. Now, you can also take radiographs, which are x-rays of the jaw of where the incisors set, the lower jaw or the upper jaw, and you can look for changes on the radiographs that'll indicate your horse has EOTRH maybe before your eyes can see it. But now that I've been looking for it, I'm seeing EOTRH everywhere. I don't radiograph these things. I tell people if they want to radiograph them, that's fine. That would confirm what I'm telling you. I tell them to save their money and let's take rid of the environmental cause. But nobody knows the cause of it to date. And I put forth my hypothesis that I believe it's that I agree with Dr. Patty Dixon out of Edinburgh, Scotland, that it is an autoimmune disease of the bones, and the teeth are secondary fallout to this autoimmune disease of the bones. And my hypothesis is that it's the proteins that are found in the inflammatory hulls of grains, such as wheat middlings, the hulls of the wheat, oat hulls, rice hulls, and all the other inflammatory byproducts that they're dumping into your horse as a way of getting rid of some that they have no purpose of. And they tell you that there's reasons why they feed it. They tell you sugar beet pulp is a resistant starch and helps to feed the hindgut bacteria. And, while that may or may not be true, it still is a foreign object that horses aren't used to. And I think that these proteins called lectins that are in the seeds will pass through the gut lining, which starts at your teeth, and passes into the bones, starts an autoimmune disease. It's just my belief. I have no proof. Nobody's proved me right or wrong, but nobody's proved anything right or wrong. Nobody said, hey, let's take some horses that don't have EOTRH and feed them this particular food and do it long enough so we can see the development of EOTRH. Nobody's done it. Nobody wants to do it. There's no money in it. What's the point of it? So you're never going to see anybody find the reason for it. Okay? I'll get back to that point toward the end of this. I know I'm at, almost 50 minutes. I've got to hurry up here because I don't want to bore you forever. But this study goes on to look at these 154 Icelandic horses aged 15 years or older, examined at 22 locations in Lower Saxony, Germany. The investigations took place from October 2020 to December 2021. And the results were the diagnosis of EOTRH was made in 72.2%. That's 109 horses out of the 151 that they looked at. 72% of these horses had EOTRH. That's huge. That's more than every other one. That's 3 out of every 4, basically, had EOTRH. The risk of contracting the disease increased with the age of the horse. Duh, they've been eating longer. In addition, there was a predisposition for male animals. I thought that was interesting. And they addressed this. My thoughts were they had more male horses than the study, therefore they had more. But they tweaked the results to say, well, yeah, that's not really true. But I got to tell you, it's just, to me, I don't think I see it more in male horses, although they do have canine teeth and females usually don't. And so I think they see it more because I think the canines can be affected before the incisors. So I think that that's a confounding factor, meaning a factor that confuses things. So I'm not going to come out and agree that it's mostly in male horses, but it makes no difference. Feeding, keeping, and dental treatments, meaning floating teeth, showed no significant influence, while place of birth seemed to influence horses developing EOTRH. And they found that horses that were born in Germany had more EOTRH than horses imported from other countries. Anyway, the results highlight how widespread EOTRH is among the German Icelandic horse population, the need for raising awareness of EOTRH, as many horses were not suspected of having EOTRH beforehand. I thought that was really interesting. In other words, the owners of these horses said, no, my horse's teeth are fine. And yet they took the radiographs and said, oh, no, you're grade 1 or grade 2 or grade 3. Without having the outward signs. I thought that was funny. And I think the outward signs, if you're honest, are there. The receding gum lines, the collar formation, that's what I call it, this little ridge of tissue on the gingiva or the gums next to the tooth. The interdental groove that I call it shouldn't be there. That just means the roots are enlarging and sinking in between. The bulbous formation, red dots that you see in the gum lines, they're all there. You're going to see them everywhere. You can see them on the Horse's Advocate. Again, type in EOTRH, and then look for EOTRH images of incisors. And I've got 180, 190 images there that you can see all different kinds of EOTRH. A lot of them are really disgusting. Anyway, the bottom line is in this story, they're talking that 109 of these horses had EOTRH, not suspicious or didn't have it, but had it either mild, moderate, or severe. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that was very interesting. But furthermore, no significant influence of horse feeding and husbandry on the development of EOTRH could be demonstrated. Listen, folks, this is a very slow progressive disease. I'm going to give you an example. In insulin resistance in humans, most insulin resistance is measured by blood values that show a problem when you're around 40 years of age, and between 40 and 50, you've got outright diabetes. 50 to 60, by 60 to 70, you're losing your toes. I mean, the disease is rampant. But if you're able to go back to when they were 20-year-olds and you're able to take a muscle biopsy, you would see the accumulation of intracellular fat within the muscle cell. And that's proof positive that you're heading toward insulin resistance and diabetes type 2 decades later. And we don't have that in EOTRH. I think when you start to see the disease, it's been coming on for a long, long time. So we need to stop it in its tracks in its infancy. And this study is looking at what were you feeding your horse? And the criteria is the horse had to have been at the farm for at least a year. But that's a short period of time. If this horse was fed between birth and let's say 4 years of age, a high grain diet, and then they exported the horse and it came to Germany, and it came in there, it could have EOTRH already developing that they won't see until the horse is 15 years of age. That's just the way it is. Nobody's been able to prove that. That's just something that I think is going on, and we need to be aware of it. Let me flip that example around. Let's say the horse was raised in America or Sweden or some other country where it wasn't fed grain until at the age of 8, it got sold and shipped to Germany. And from the age of 8 to 15, it was fed grain the whole time. And then they say, oh, well, this is a horse that came in from out of country and it doesn't have EOTRH, but the horse that was fed grain from 0 age to 15, it does. So that difference of 8 years may make a difference in the development of overt disease, but they're not addressing it in here. I just don't know. Because again, we don't know the cause of EOTRH until we know what the cause is, and we can prove that if we feed this and it takes 10 years before we start to see signs, we're not going to be able to find it. So these studies look really good, but at face value, they fall very short for me. But here comes part B. They don't call it part B, but they put it right afterwards, and I can't wait to tell you this one. Potential impact of natural conditions on the rostral oral health, a study of horses in Iceland. And this is really amazing. In the context of a study of equine odontoclastic tooth resorption hypersematosis, elderly Icelandic horses were examined in their originating country. The subject of this survey was the impact of dental treatment and keeping and feeding management on the health of the rostral oral cavity. Now, the rostral means the front, and the oral cavity, of course, is the mouth. So they're just talking about the incisors and the canines of all horses, right? A total of 170 horses aged 15 or older, located in different areas of Northwest, West, and South Iceland. Result, most of the horses were kept on pasture all year with little supplemental feeding. The actual number was 11 months on the year were pasture, and 1 month was put in some sort of shelter. So how does that compare with your horse? Anyway, the horses were clinically examined with particular attention to gingival, that's the gum, and dental disorders of the rostral mouth, that's the front teeth, such as inflammation of the gums, that's gingivitis, fistula, gingival retraction, that just means the pulling up the, exposing the tooth, enlargement of the roots, that's that bulbous look, and dental calculus, which is basically tartar on the incisors, as well as integrity of incisors, bite angle, and tooth mobility. Horses with EOTRH, the teeth actually get loosened. You can wiggle them with your fingers, so that's not good. This bite angle is all this fancy stuff where the teeth going straight across is normal. If they have a smile or a frown or a slant or something like that, where the teeth don't go straight across, they call that the bite angle. And a lot of people make a big deal out of this. I've been saying since 2001, when I had lunch with Patty Dixon, that I said it was secondary to the sharp edges in the back that affect the way the tongue moves. And he virtually agreed by saying they think that the incisor shape is secondary to things in the back. So that was really good. It's a good lunch. Thanks, Dr. Dixon, if you're hearing this. Okay, results. Most of the horses were kept on pasture all year with little supplemental feeding. The frequency of dental treatment in Iceland was low. And that's the vets are all recommending it, but the people don't do it. Only a few horses were affected by tooth loss, gingivitis, gingival recession, and incisor calculus. Calculus occurred more frequently and more severely in canines than in incisors. That's what we see here in America. I mean, if you're going to see tartar, you're going to see it on the canines before you see it on the incisors. If you see it on the incisors, think EOTRH, right? The findings did not depend on the location of the horse. So it didn't matter where they were in Iceland. Clinical relevance, assuming that the remarkable health of the rostral oral cavity in elderly Icelandic horses was not caused by preventive dental care. I love the word remarkable health. That means, wow, Do you see those front teeth? They don't look anything like what we see in Germany. I think that's funny. Was not caused by preventive dental care. So in other words, they're not getting their teeth floated and the front teeth look great. What the heck's going on here? It is likely that it was due to living conditions in Iceland. Continuity, intensity of chewing, and nativeness of forage might promote the health of incisors and tissues surrounding the tooth, even in elderly horses. Say hallelujah. I mean, haven't we been saying this all along? If we start feeding the horses the way they evolutionarily came, they would be so much better off. And then I've said this, I've got it in writing. How do you feed an Icelandic horse, a Peruvian Paso, and a Mongolian horse, all living in Mississippi, USA? I mean, it's not the native forage at all. And someone's going to be throwing in sugar cubes and carrots and peppermints and supplements because somebody got on the kick that, oh, my horse is low in omega-3, so we have to add this and that. And so we're ruining our horses. I mean, that's just the bottom line. This whole study showed that you get a horse that's living in its natural environment, its teeth are going to be fine. But I get horses from all over Europe, from South America, from Middle East, and they come to America, and I get all sorts of different teeth, and then they start saying, like, you know, I want to do the best for my horse, and I'm looking, and I said, well, your horse already has EOTRH at the beginning of it, and they say, what do I do about it? I said, well, nobody knows exactly for sure, but my guess is, based on my experience, that if you stop feeding grain, you're probably going to be able to help them, especially grain byproducts. So there are some people who say, no, I don't want to do that. Other people say, sure, I'll do that, but they don't. And other people do. But I will tell you this, and I'm not a spokesman for Equident, but Equident is a company that shredded mushrooms and said, give it to these horses with EOTRH. And when you ask veterinarians, especially a group of veterinarians who think they're equine dentists, who are sitting in an audience listening to Dr. Patty Dixon at the AAP meeting, and someone says, what do you think about shredded mushrooms? And you hear everyone just chuckle. Dr. Dixon, Dr. Easley, they're on the panel. All the members out in the audience, they just start chuckling. Ha, 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 ha. Shredded mushrooms. This is a serious disease. You don't throw shredded mushrooms at a serious disease, right? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Somebody asked about shredded mushrooms, and each time, everyone chuckled. Chuckled, if you don't know what chuckling means, it's like snickering. It's like laughing, but not belly laughing. It's just like, God, what are you, ridiculous? Come on. Can't you say something serious? And then Dr. Dixon said, well, if you had to push me in a corner and I had to guess, I would guess that EOTRH is an autoimmune disease. And all my light bulbs went off when I said, okay, so if autoimmune diseases in humans are related to lectins, and lectins causing inflammation and leaky gut syndrome and Crohn's disease, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, all can be related back to what you're eating. I said, why couldn't it? And the mucus of your mucous membranes has a long chain sugar that binds to these lectins and helps pull it out. So lectins are proteins that plants make to make us sick, so we stop eating them. But we've come up with a defense for that. Says, look, I want to eat your wheat. So here, let's bind you to this mucus and throw you out the back end. And most of us do okay. Not all of us, but a lot of us do. So if you don't do well, it's well known in the human world that if you have this inflammation from plant lectins, eat mushrooms. Mushrooms bind to lectins. And I said, well, this is a no-brainer. So since then, and I can't remember how many years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know, long time, I've been recommending horses with EOTRH go on Equident. And within weeks, the painful teeth are no longer painful. The high degree of inflammation, not nearly as inflamed. Now, if the teeth are already loose and they're coming out, they're dead, you're not going to help it. You're not going to take a horse that looks horrible and make it look better and natural, normal. You're never going to send it back. But you stop it in its tracks. You bind to the offending organism, or not organism, the proteins, and the horse does well. So why don't we do a study? Why don't we get, 100 horses of the EOTRH, and they all have significant pain, or they do all, they're having trouble biting an apple, biting a whole carrot, get some sort of standard. So if a horse can't bite a 1-inch diameter carrot, that's grade, A. And if he can, with some effort, it's a grade B. And if he can easily snap it, it's a grade C, something like that. And they all have positive EOTRH by radiographic or whatever means, and give them some Equident and do it for, 2 weeks or a month, whatever, and then do the test again. Sounds like a pretty simple test to me. That would be a scientific study. I could be written up in, maybe in a journal. Well, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to let you guys figure it out. But I guess that's all I got to say. I want to tell you about the peripheral caries as a harbinger, meaning an indicator of more issues that are going on in the horse's body. And EOTRH is part and parcel of that. And we have to stop feeding these inflammatory ingredients and get these horses healthy again. I see it, all you guys are telling me around the world, sending me little notes saying what a difference it's made to my horse. I'll never go back to feeding grain ever again. And I'm sorry if you're a grain dealer or a grain manufacturer, or your whole business is all about grain. I'm so sorry. But somebody's got to stand up for the horse. I know you want to make a profit. I get it. We all do. We all want to live. We all want to have, a happy life. But I'm not going to sell drugs. I'm not going to even sell alcohol, because I know alcohol will kill us. I'm not going to sell, something that's going to harm people or horses or animals. It's just not my nature. I just want to give you great information. And that's what I do here at the Horses Advocate. I'm so grateful. This is my third go, so I hope it says it's recording up in the upper corner. So I hope it is. And thank you for joining me. And I'll see you next week. And if I don't show up in your Wednesday podcast, please forgive me. My son's here. We're doing stuff. We're actually going to see a live NFL football game with the Miami Dolphins against the New York Jets. That's going to be fun. So we're doing stuff. And I got to take this time for family. So I may be taking a couple weeks off. I may not. It all depends on my time. And I'm just crazy busy this time of year, floating teeth. So hang in there, folks. If you don't hear from me for a while, I'll be back in the new year. So I'll see you around. In the meantime, thank you from the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you. May you all have a blessed holiday season. If you're Christian and believe in Christmas, that's great. If you're not and you believe in something else, that's great. I just 100% adore each and every one of you, because there's one thing that we all have in common, no matter what our skin color is, or religious, or our political beliefs. We're all here for the horse. And for that, I'm so grateful. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Doc T out. Bye.
Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.